Blessings, good evening to you all. We're now into autumn, so the nights are drawing in, the days are getting shorter, the weather at night is cooling down, even though the days are still warm. And it's Tuesday night, so we have some questions come in, which we'll endeavour to give you some answers to. So there's a question here: how to get rid of the feeling of I am inadequate, and sometimes the little aversion towards some behaviors from some people. Well, the first part of the answer is, this is entirely normal as a human being, because we're born with some attachment, what we call sakkaya ditthi, self-view, and our mindfulness and wisdom is not yet complete and perfect, so we will be subject to aversion towards ourselves and others from time to time. So it's nothing unusual, and probably everyone experiences it, sometimes more, sometimes less. So anything that involves self-aversion, self-doubt, self-criticism, or aversion towards others, the first quality that might help is the practice of metta, goodwill, directed towards oneself, towards others. And like all aspects of meditation, metta, goodwill, can be practiced in a way of samatha, putting your mind on that object as a way to pull the mind away from the more negative thoughts and feelings you may be experiencing. So literally changing your thoughts and bringing up mindfulness and changing your mind to a more wholesome, skillful object. And the other aspect of metta is the wisdom side, contemplating and developing and understanding from wise reflection directed to the problem, to yourself, to the issue. So when you practice metta bhavana, you should be practicing this every day. The Buddha encouraged us to practice this every day. Whether you have feelings of inadequacy or not, you have aversion to others or not, just practice it anyway. Be prepared. It's for our own sense of well-being. And practicing metta as a meditation could be first thing in the morning, last thing at night, or any time that you have free time. You're developing some kind of, we say, object, meditation object that represents goodwill. So generally we have a thought. If you're new to this meditation, then you bring up a thought or a train of thought or a phrase or a word that helps bring up the perception of goodwill as a starting point. So it could literally be the thought metta, just one word, metta, or goodwill, or loving kindness. Or it could be a phrase. So the traditional one that we chant is, may I be well, may I be free from suffering. But that could be developed in any way you want, so you can write these words in your mind. What words or phrases work for you to bring up the thought of goodwill. Maybe it involves forgiveness, maybe it involves the aspiration to be free from stress, free from aversion. So you recite that word, that phrase over and over again. And you also need to develop the feeling. So you have to remember that feeling or conjure up that feeling. If you're not familiar with it, you have to work at remembering what the feeling of goodwill, love, kindness is, what it feels like. And for some people, they find that quite difficult. They've lost touch with that feeling. As the song says, you've lost that loving feeling. You have to find it. So you can use perceptions that bring it up. So the perception as if you're cradling a baby, holding a kitten or a puppy, or goodwill towards some person that is very like a grandparent or someone that brings up that feeling, and you try and remember that feeling so it starts to become a tangible feeling, maybe in your heart. So as you're developing the thought, may I be well, free from suffering, you're bringing that feeling up in whatever way you can. And of course, at first it's difficult, especially if you have lots of feelings of being inadequate, or you're having aversion to other people as well. It's something you have to work at. Little by little, you have to keep coming back to this feeling. So you have to see it as something useful, good for you. Obviously, you have to see it as a valuable practice. You're working on seeds of seeing that your own innate self-worth as a human being, your potential for kindness and compassion, that potential, you're bringing it out through this practice. And of course, it's not always easy. So you have to work at it patiently, keep developing it. And what we may tend to do is just keep going back to the thoughts of inadequacy, self-criticism, or then aversion to others, because we're more used to thinking those thoughts, perhaps. So you're changing your way of thinking by bringing up the thought of metta, the goodwill, the feeling, and you work at putting your mind on that little by little. Slowly, if it has to be slowly, you do it slowly, gradually. And one thing with the practice of metta is you're developing a sense of non-judgmental awareness. So often we say develop the thought, the feeling, just as you have towards a family member. Not when you're angry with them, but when you have goodwill for a family member, say like on their birthday or at some time when you're happy for them, sharing in their happiness. You bring up that thought like a family member. So you're seeing that you have some connection. So if it's with yourself, you're seeing the connection with yourself as an idea. I'm a human being. There's some goodness here. There's something good here, something to be developed. You have to bring that up in your mind, in your meditation. See your own innate self-worth, but you have to bring it up as a feeling, and with the thinking as well. The thought, may I be well, may I be free from suffering, and keep working on it. And as you become better at directing it to yourself, hopefully you feel more relaxed, and that feeling can start to permeate your physical body and become more tangible, more clear with the thinking, the recitation of the thought or the phrase. And then the second part is to direct that same feeling, same thought out to others. So it could be starting with the easy people, the ones you love and like easily. So people you appreciate, like parents, grandparents, family members, people who have helped you, so close friends, teachers, colleagues, people you feel grateful towards easily and have a good feel for, a respect for. You start with the people who it's easy to think of, and then you maybe move on to those you feel more neutral towards, and then you move towards those people you might actually feel hostile to or averse to. And this is a skill. At first it's hard to do. And your mind recoils when you think of someone you're hostile towards normally, or you're averse to normally, you don't want to think good thoughts of goodwill or develop a feeling, a relaxed, loving feeling, and send it mentally to that person. Your mind recoils from that and doesn't want to. It will argue. You say, they don't deserve it. I don't want to do this. I don't like them. But again, you're trying to see the innate humanity in that person, and you're working on seeds, seeing that there's goodness in that person. At first you may not recognize the goodness, remember any good things about them, see them, but you work at it. So even if there's only a tiny bit of goodness, you take that and you work with that. And you have to be very careful, because as soon as you lose your mindfulness, your awareness, you'll go back into your old way of thinking. You'll be negative again and remember the bad things and the things that annoy you. So it's a real work of developing mindfulness, carefulness, and valuing the very practice that you're doing, seeing that is important, because it's helping to improve your own state of mind. And the mind with loving kindness is a much better mind than the mind with anger. It's better for us, it's better for others. It leads on, it nourishes the mind in so many ways. This is why it's worth doing. So when you're thinking of others and all you can think of is what you don't like about them and you're annoyed, you really have to slowly, patiently work at bringing up a sense of kindness towards them, tolerance. And it doesn't mean to say you have to like them and love them, but you're seeing the goodness in them and working on focusing on that and sending your thoughts to them. May they improve, may they be better. And the simile is like if you need water and you're in the forest, the wilderness, and there's no water around, but it's rained, and you just find a little bit of water in a puddle in the footprint of an animal. So we sometimes get that here. You get a deer walking through the forest, leaves a footprint, and a little bit of rain sits in that footprint. And you can get that water if you lie down and put your mouth over the footprint. You may be able to sip a little bit of that water without getting mud in it. You can't put your hand in the footprint, it's too small. If you bash your lips on the side of the footprint, you get mud in your mouth. It doesn't work. You have to be very centered and very focused and just sip from the middle of the footprint and get a bit of pure water. That's like you're focusing on the thought of metta, even though you're surrounded by aversion and anger towards yourself, towards others. And you have to work on it. And we have to use what we've got. So if your starting point is aversion towards yourself, towards others, you have to just start there and accept that this is the beginning point. But you bring up the love like a parent for their baby. A baby may be screaming, messy, vomiting, pooing, urinating, making a mess. But the parent's love cuts through that, pushes through all the unpleasantness to the important thing, which is to have the love for the baby, because the baby is vulnerable and doesn't know what's happening. It's like that. You have to really develop your metta to the point where it can push through all the surrounding aversion. And you just keep working at it every day. While there's still aversion coming up, you still have a practice to develop goodwill, forgiveness, letting go, based on developing the thought of goodwill. So that's it as a meditation, replacing the ill will with goodwill. But we can also use wisdom, reflection, wise reflection, thinking it through sometimes, on the deepest levels, at the level of wisdom, is reflecting on these 5 khandhas. These 5 khandhas are not a self. They're impermanent, they arise, they pass away according to causes and conditions. So that's the truth for ill will as much as goodwill. So if you have thoughts of ill will towards yourself, or self-doubt, or feelings of inadequacy, these are part of the five khandhas, aren't they? There's sankhara khandha, the mental formations, the intentions. There's the perceptions, the sanya khandha. There's the feelings that go with them, whether it's physical feelings or mental feelings. There's the sense consciousness, seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling. And there's the physical form. And these five khandhas are impermanent in their nature. They're conditioned things. They arise, pass away according to causes and conditions. So you can reflect in this way, on the deepest level, to see the impermanent nature of angry thoughts. And what's impermanent is not a self and can be let go of. So one can come from that approach of wisdom, just reflecting on the changing, impermanent nature of one's mental activity. So thoughts of inadequacy are just thoughts of inadequacy that arise and pass away. And you try and develop enough mindfulness and wise reflection to see that more clearly. And seeing it clearly means you can let it go. Because ultimately there is no self in these five khandhas. So there's no self in the thought of I am inadequate. Maybe understandable why you have that thought, but ultimately there's no self in it. It's just a thought. It can be let go of. So we learn to establish mindfulness and not feed the thought with attachment and giving it importance. Quite the opposite. We're letting the thought go by not giving it importance, not feeding it. So gradually it will fade from the mind. And we have to work at that. There's one situation you may say it's a worthwhile thought, feeling of inadequacy. It's like when you think of Nibbana, which is the goal of our practice. Nibbana is the state of mind that is free from birth and death, free from suffering, free from mental defilement, free from attachment. So when you reflect on Nibbana, which you probably should from time to time to remind you of your goal, then you look back at yourself and you'll feel inadequate. And that's correct, because you still have mental defilements and attachments. Your mind is not always peaceful, you still have imperfections. So you compare your current state of mind and how your mind is with Nibbana, you're going to feel a bit inadequate and feel, I'm a long way from Nibbana, and that's normal. But instead of feeling depressed about it and giving up, which may happen if you become too attached to your thoughts of aversion and self-criticism, it should spur you on, motivate you to practice more and say, there's still more to do in this practice. And indeed, the Buddha himself, practicing for Nibbana, he said he always was discontent with what he had achieved in the practice, but not from a place of aversion, but just from a place of seeing the true nature of his mind and knowing there's still attachment, delusion there, and pressing on in his practice to go beyond it. So in that sense, a little bit of feeling of inadequacy, recognizing one is still not there yet, not reaching Nibbana yet, that's okay. But don't get so attached to it that it makes you depressed and gives up. And that's where you have to be careful, and not to go into the feeling of depression and disappointment. So another question from someone here asking to talk about one of the forest meditation masters. His name was Lumpur Phak, which is slightly awkward in our English language, but the word Phak in Thai means like cucumber or it's squash, kind of melon. So it's a perfectly ordinary term in the Thai language. So Luang Por Phak was a disciple of Luang Por Lee Dhammadaro, who died many years ago now, who was considered to be an enlightened disciple of Luang Por Man. And he started a very well-known monastery called Wat Asokaram, which is in Samut Prakan on the edge of Bangkok. And it's still a very well-known monastery today. And if I remember right, Luang Por Phak ordained in the year 2500, which is considered the Buddha Jayanti, the halfway point in the life of the Bodhisattva, the Buddhist religion. Like we're now at 2565 in the Buddhist calendar. It started at 0, and when the Buddha was alive and enlightened, we've come through 2,565 years. So we're over halfway through what the Buddha predicted as the lifespan of the Buddhist teachings in the world. And in the year 2500, there were many celebrations, and at Wat Asokaram, they had a mass ordination, hundreds of young men ordained as monks to celebrate the occasion. So Luang Por Phak was one of them. I think he was about 22 years old. And he had faith in Buddhism and faith in Luang Por Lee Dhammadaro, a very famous meditation master. And so he ordained, but he thought he would just ordain temporarily, as many young Thai men do, as a kind of cultural thing, to make merit for his parents and just do a good thing, learn some discipline, learn some chanting, learn to meditate, but just temporarily. But once he was a monk, he had some good experiences. He found he got a lot of joy from listening to the Dhamma. He got a lot of faith arising in his teacher, Luang Por Lee Dhammadaro, and he had some peace arising in his meditation. And these were all kind of prompting him to reconsider. And then he heard someone say that his father had said if his son disrobes, he'd be heartbroken, because his father had a lot of faith in Buddhism and he wanted his son to be a monk. So that was it. That made him change his mind. He wasn't going to disrobe, he's going to stay a monk. So he's getting his own internal happiness. He also wanted to make his father happy and thought that was a good thing. So he stayed on as a monk at Wat Asokaram. And he's very sincere. He took his practice very sincerely, so he learned the Vinaya, all the rules, and learned how to meditate using the word Buddho, the meditation word, which is recited over and over again. And got some success in his personal meditation practice. And because he was quite devoted to Luang Por Lee Dhammadaro, he became one of the monks who attended on Luang Por Lee Dhammadaro. And this is what we call the practice of Acharya Vata, where we, as monks, we train in attending on a senior monk, washing his bowl, washing his robes, cleaning his meditation hut for him, and just generally attending on that teacher. It's part of our training. And he did that very well because he's a very mindful monk and a very devoted monk. In his early years, he was very skinny. He didn't eat much at all, and he didn't sleep much. He got a reputation for eating little and sleeping little and talking little. He was very silent and didn't want to waste time talking a lot. He put his effort into his meditation. And he learnt the Patimokkha, which is the 227 rules of discipline. And many monks will learn to recite this off by heart, and then every 2 weeks one of the community will recite it for the others to hear. So you have to learn it off by heart. And he was always praised as one of the best chanters of the Patimokkha. Very clear in his pronunciation, very good memory, very mindful, very good memory, and chanted it very well. So as a young monk, he did all his duties and practices very well and became quite trusted by his teacher Ajahn Lee Dhammadaro, and he did travel away a little bit to other places to meditate, but spent most of his time with his teacher. He said he had the desire to want to go wandering in the forest, as many young monks did, but he suppressed that desire out of respect for his teacher, and just to stay close to his teacher, to learn the Dhamma, which he loved to listen to his teacher's Dhamma, and serve his teacher. So actually set aside his own wish to go wandering in the forest for the first many years of his life. But then, if you know the biography of Luang Por Lee Dhammadaro, he died quite suddenly. This is back in the 1960s. He died quite suddenly. He wasn't that old. And so after he passed away, Luang Por Phak, still quite a young monk, then he decided to go and train with Ajahn Mahabua, who everyone felt was the disciple of Ajahn Mun, who was closest to Ajahn Mun when he was alive, and was a very good teacher. And he had his own monastery already up in Udon. So Luang Por Phak, the young Luang Por Phak, went to live with Ajahn Mahabua, who accepted him because he knew him already. He'd met him many times at Wadasokaram. And he went up there and performed the same kind of duties. His character meant that he quite quickly became an attendant monk, serving Ajahn Mahabua, helping him run the monastery, helping him with his personal things, looking after his hut, looking after his robes and bowl. He was very good at that. He was a very kind of devoted monk to whichever teacher he was living with. And he also had developed quite a lot of skills. So by the time he was 10 reigns, he knew many things, and he became Ajahn Mahabua's trusted assistant. And so he helped to run the monastery, oversee the monks. If any monk was not behaving very well, Ajahn Mahabua would have Luang Por Phak go and teach them and explain to them how to practice. He would receive incoming monks, new monks. So Ajahn Panyawado, the English monk, who I knew quite well, was living there, or came to live there, and Ajahn Phak oversaw him, bringing him into the Sangha and teaching him many things. So he was very grateful to him. And he also was quite skilled at overseeing building projects, which is a thing monks have to do. Sometimes you have to oversee the building of a hall or kutis or kitchen, toilets. Just like in the time of the Buddha, Venerable Mahamoggallana used to do that for the Buddha. Luang Por Phak would oversee the building projects, and they say because he was very well practiced and very disciplined and very confident, he was the only monk who could present a different opinion to Ajahn Mahabua, who was a very fierce and highly respected and revered teacher, and most monks didn't like to question him or bring up an opinion with him. They just accepted whatever he said. But Luang Por Phak would, because he was confident in what he knew and what he practiced, and Ajahn Mahabua would listen to him. So he had a reputation as being the only monk Ajahn Mahabua would listen to. Even Ajahn Mahabua himself joked about this later on, and it's like a way of praising that monk, saying even I had to listen to him because he always had something good or correct to say. So Ajahn Mahabua was always praising Ajahn Phak, and as a good monk, as a wise and well-practiced monk. And because of that, he said he wanted to keep him with him over the years because he was such a good monk, so helpful in the monastery. But actually, Ajahn Mahabua eventually sent him back to his home area, which is Jantaburi province, the next province along from Rayong, where I used to live with Ajahn Anan, is Jantaburi province on the southeast coast of Thailand. He was from there originally, and there's a monastery there called Wat Khao Noi, or the Little Mountain Monastery, and it is a little mountain, like a little peak hill. It's more of a hill than a mountain, but they call it a mountain, which for decades had been a very well-known place for meditation monks to practice, and many of the great students of Ajahn Mun went to stay and practice there. So it's a place that the Sangha wanted to look after. And the local laity had a lot of faith in Ajahn Mun and forest monks, and the Sangha wanted to look after it because so many of them had stayed there and meditated there. So like Ajahn Mahabua, Lumpur Chop, Lumpur Fan, Lumpur Lee Damodaro himself, many well-known forest masters had practiced there. So Ajahn Mahabua sent Ajahn Phak to stay there and look after that monastery. He said he was reluctant because he wanted him to stay with him, because maybe for selfish reasons have a good monk is, it helps you. But he thought it was time for him to go and be his own teacher and have his own monastery. So he sent him down there. And he was what you might call a local boy. So he was from that region. And so the local people already immediately had a connection with him and would listen to him. Because sometimes you need that. You need to be able to talk to the local people in their own language, understand them. So he was from that region, he could talk to them very well. So he became abbot of that monastery. So when I got to know him, he was already abbot of that monastery, the Little Mountain Monastery, and he became famous living there. And over the years, some of the Western monks from our tradition went to stay with him, such as Ajahn Yanadamo, spent time there, and some of the others. I never lived there for more than a night or two, but I got to know him because he was quite close to Ajahn Anand's monastery where I lived, and so he would visit us and we would visit him, and he would share his Dhamma teachings with us, encourage us to put all our heart into our meditation, keep the Vinaya, keep the monks' rules strictly, practice mindfulness every day, and not waste time with unnecessary things like eating, sleeping, and talking. So this is the life of a forest monk. Talking is an unnecessary thing. So it's say talk little, and he practiced that through his training. He would not waste a lot of time socializing, talking about worldly things, talking about politics and entertainment and worldly issues. He would just talk about important matters for Dhamma and Vinaya and what was useful for the monastery, say. So talking little, sleeping little. He himself generally practiced sleeping little at night. He would sleep between 1 and 3 hours per night. So he said if he slept a lot, he'd sleep for 3 hours. 3 hours for him was a lot. 1 hour, 2 hours was more normal. So he's somebody who slept little, ate little. Until later in life, he always was quite skinny as a young monk and put forth a lot of effort, but in his practice. But later in life, he got quite ill. He had, I think he may have had a stroke even, but he certainly had problems with nerve system and a lot of pain, a lot of painful headaches, and painful nerve issues with damaged nerves in his body, which brought him a lot of pain. So he used to do a lot of acupuncture, and basically was having constant headaches in the later part of his life. And yet he managed to cope with that quite well. He never complained, he never displayed much suffering with these headaches, but we knew he was having intense headaches. So somebody who had to learn to live with pain, and did that very well. Very tough, enduring. he used to like coming to visit Ajahn monastery. I remember one time I was there and we were doing our afternoon chores, and he brought a whole bunch of monks and laymen who came with him to visit. And they, first of all, they came into the meditation hall to bow, pay respects to the main Buddha shrine, and we were cleaning, and we were wiping down the shrine. Like behind me here, there's a shrine. Ours is a wooden shrine, and we dust it and clean it regularly. In Ajahn monastery, it was a marble shrine with a Buddha sitting on it, and we dust it and clean it regularly. And he came in and he said to his monks and his laymen, he said, "This monastery, they practice very well. Look at this." And he ran his fingers along the marble shrine, and he said, "Look, no dust." And luckily there was no dust because we cleaned it. So we were going, phew, good thing we cleaned it properly, because he was showing us off to his own group of monks and lay people. He said, this is what a practice monastery is like. They keep it clean, maintained, repaired well. And if you have a clean monastery, you have a clean mind, was his teaching. And he said, you know, somebody who takes care of their mind takes care of their monastery, takes care of their dwelling place, the place they live. They look after it just like they look after their mind. And he also liked Ajahn monastery because of the good air there, because it was a hill. Always got a breeze there, because Jantaburi and Rayong, they're quite humid part of Thailand. They have a lot of rain, and it can be quite humid, but the air on these hills, like his monastery, Ajahn monastery, would get good airflow from being higher up. So he liked to come. He said, "Oh, this is a very auspicious place." He'd meditate and say, "Oh, there's good devas here, there's good airflow here, good feeling, good energy in the monastery." And we'd go to his monastery and visit him there, sometimes visit Ajahn Mahabua. When he'd come there, he'd like to go and visit Ajahn Phak's monastery. So it's a good way to see Ajahn Mahabua, is go and visit that monastery when he was there. So he was a very kind monk. He would always give us time when we went to see him, as well as many other monks would go and see him. And when he passed away, they had a cremation at his monastery. His monastery was not that big. It was a small mountain, small hill, surrounded by fruit orchards. So I remember the cremation was quite hard to organize because it very limited space, but had a cremation, and monks came from all over Thailand, thousands of monks. And Lumpur Ban came, if I remember, Lumpur Ban was the senior monk at his cremation. I think Ajahn Mahabua had already passed away by then. So a well-loved, well-respected monk. So another question here. What does it mean by the term to die mindfully? Does this mean at the moment of dying one does not have any unwholesome thoughts and feelings? Well, you could say that literally. If you're mindful at any moment, whether it's at the moment of death or any moment through your life, mindfulness is a wholesome, skillful Dhamma, kusala Dhamma. It's it means to recollect, have presence of mind, and you may be recollecting something, so you might be mindful of the Buddha, or mindful of your precepts, or mindful of impermanence, practicing vipassana. You're having mindfulness and insight into the impermanent nature of thoughts, mental states, feelings in the body, or the body itself, for example. But if you're mindful, wisdom can be there as well. Mindfulness is the supporting factor for wisdom, or insight, or Dhamma Vichaya. So mindfulness is wholesome. So at the moment your mind is wholesome, then obviously unwholesome Dhammas can't be present in the mind when there's a wholesome Dhamma there. They can't exist together at the same moment. So literally, if you were mindful at the moment of death, your mind would not be in an unwholesome state. So that would be the best way to die. Probably the best mindfulness object to have at the moment of death is mindfulness of Nibbana, emptiness, non-attachment, the unconditioned. If you had mindfulness of the unconditioned at the moment of death, maybe you actually attain Nibbana right then. So, there's the story of the monk in the time of the Buddha who was not yet enlightened, hadn't yet reached Nibbana, but he was in the forest practicing very hard. But then along came a tiger, and the tiger started to attack him. But he didn't run away, he didn't fight, he just focused his mind on his meditation object to maintain mindfulness as he was being eaten and attacked by this tiger. And they say the tiger ate and attacked him from the feet up. So as his legs were getting chewed on, eaten up, he attained Sotapanna, first stage of enlightenment, and then Sakadagami, and as the tiger attacked him more, further up his body he attained Anagami, and then just as he was about to die he attained Arahant by focusing his mind on the unconditioned. So the tiger killed him, but he attained Nibbana as he died. So that's the classic. You're unlikely to be killed by a tiger. It's more likely to be something like old age or some disease like a heart attack or stroke or cancer. But the principle is the same. You have to maintain mindfulness through that illness, through your old age. Not let the unwholesome dhammas, greed, anger, delusion, attachment, confusion, fear, worry, anxiety. That's why we practice mindfulness, is to abandon those unwholesome states. So we practice from this day. We don't wait until we're on our deathbed to start practicing mindfulness, because it's too late then. It's very difficult to begin practicing when you're on your deathbed. You practice now while you're healthy and able to listen to the Dhamma. And don't waste your life, don't waste your time, don't be heedless, we say. Because what we tend to do is say, well, death is far off in the future. I'm not going to practice mindfulness until a bit later in life. And then, of course, we never know when we're going to die, so it's too late. By the time we actually realize we're going to die, it's too late. So start now. Practice meditation every day, practice mindfulness every day, mindfulness of your precepts, mindfulness of your meditation object, mindfulness of the impermanent nature of your 5 khandhas. That would be a good starting point. And do it every day and maintain mindfulness as much as you can. And any moment you're truly mindful, an unwholesome Dhamma cannot occupy your mind. So like with that earlier question about aversion, if you have mindfulness, you can't be angry. If you're angry, you've lost your mindfulness. So it's telling you something. When you fall into anger, it's saying, re-establish mindfulness. If you're caught into anxiety or worry, it's telling you, re-establish your mindfulness. If you have greed for something, some kind of desire, obsession has come up, overcoming your mind, it's telling you, get back to mindfulness, re-establish your mindfulness. When mindfulness is there, wisdom, insight into the Dhamma can happen. It's a cause for insight. So if you look at the enlightenment factors, the 7 factors of enlightenment, it always begins with Dhamma. Sati, Dhamma Vichaya, investigation of the Dhamma, Viriya, effort, Piti, Pasadi, Samadhi, Upekkha. These 7 factors of enlightenment. It always begins with mindfulness. No mindfulness, no enlightenment. So we always come back to that as our starting point, whether it's right here now or on our deathbed, doesn't matter. Keep practicing. If you're not sure what to be mindful of, the Buddha said be mindful of the Buddha, what we call Buddhanusati. Sati means mindfulness, recollection, Buddha, recollection of the Buddha. If in doubt, recollect the Buddha, the qualities of the Buddha, the compassion, the wisdom, the peace, whatever concept or idea of the Buddha you can hold in mind, be mindful of that, keep that in mind. At a moment when you're afraid, when you're worried, when you're dying, when you're ill, keep the Buddha in mind as much as possible. If you have any difficult time in your life, you're about to have a difficult conversation with someone, recollect the Buddha. If you're facing surgery or some medical crisis in your life, recollect the Buddha. If there's war or flooding, recollect the Buddha. If there's problem at work or in your relationship with your children, recollect the Buddha. On and on it goes. You can recollect the Buddha and it will bring you mindfulness and help cut through the unwholesome states of mind. So, highly recommended practice to bring up mindfulness. Time for one more question. It says, was Kuan Yin the Bodhisattva a real person in human history? You have to read the history book and you'll probably find, yes. I'm sure if you read history books of Chinese Buddhism, or if you go to Wikipedia or something like that, you'll probably find Kuan Yin was a real person. When I was a kid, I used to watch the monkey series. There's a monk, Tripitaka, taking the Buddhist teachings from India back to China, maybe 1,000 years ago. I'm not sure of the exact dates. And they say Tripitaka, the monk, was an incarnation of Kuan Yin, because it's such an auspicious thing to bring the Buddhist teachings to China, spread Buddhism there. So they say this is Kuan Yin in an incarnation, reborn as a monk, taking the Buddhist teachings to China, helped by the friends, monkey and the pig and the other guy. So through history, Buddhist history, perhaps you could say it's myth, legend. Kuan Yin has come up. In Chinese Buddhism, they talk about Miao San. It's the female incarnation of Kuan Yin, so that's where we get the statues of the female deity Kuan Yin, Bodhisattva. Strictly speaking, they say Kuan Yin is Aolokiteshwara Bodhisattva. Up there in Dusita heaven, they say Kuan Yin or Aolokiteshwara Bodhisattva is the second most longest living Bodhisattva after Amita Buddha, according to those who know. So Amitabha Buddha is the longest serving Bodhisattva, will be the last person to be enlightened, because these Bodhisattvas have made a vow to practice and help all beings to enlightenment before them taking in or experiencing enlightenment themselves. So it's the greatest sacrifice. So Aolokiteshwara or Kuan Yin is just second to Amitabha Buddha. So somebody who's made a very strong vow to just keep going until everyone else is enlightened. So it's that kind of thought is of great compassion. So they call Kuan Yin the goddess of compassion. Anyone who's in trouble, they think of Kuan Yin, they'll get some help. So often people are making vows and requests and determinations and asking for help from Kuan Yin or Aolokiteshvara Bodhisattva. And people often find that they get a lot of strength of mind thinking of Kuan Yin, because it brings up the right qualities, the determination, the patience, the effort, the compassion, the wisdom to get through whatever problem they have. And that's often how bodhisattvas are used, aren't they? One recollects the bodhisattva. to get strength of mind in the practice. And then people also emulate them, so they also take their own Bodhisattva vows to serve and sacrifice for others. So some people incline towards that in their practice. They find that's a strength in their practice, and it helps draw out the best in them. So, a very good thought, particularly strong in Chinese Buddhism, but even in Thailand you'll go around temples, which, Thailand is a Theravada Buddhist country, and in some Theravada monasteries you'll have a corner with a shrine to Aolokiteshwara or Quan Bodhisattva, and always very popular. People love to go and bow and make offerings. Of course, can give rise to superstition as well, but if used skillfully as a source of recollection of good qualities of compassion, wisdom, effort, it can be a strength in people's practice. I remember one story, true story, found inspiring. This was in Malaysia. There was one Chinese temple which actually was devoted to Kuan Yin, but the monk who lived there, who was a very pure monk, Theravada monk, he told me he was living there and he had no problems with Kuan Yin Bodhisattva. There's a shrine, a statue to Kuan Yin, but the people who go to that temple also had some other beliefs, superstitions, and one of the things they did, they had other gods that they worshipped, as it were, and one of the things they did every year was have an animal sacrifice to their gods. And that's still carried out in some traditions. People actually sacrifice animals. So, nothing to do with Buddhism, nothing to do with the Bodhisattva either, but he tried to teach them not to do that and said, you shouldn't sacrifice animals, chickens, goats. This is not Buddhist practice, and this is a Buddhist temple, you shouldn't do that. And they didn't like that, and they were the people who ran the temple, so they kicked him out. They said, you got to leave, because he was sticking up for the animals, basically, saying you shouldn't sacrifice these animals. And he was saying, you've got a shrine here to Kuan Yin, how can you sacrifice animals, kill animals, when you also worship Kuan Yin? It doesn't go together. It's not what the Bodhisattva or the Buddha taught. So they kicked him out. He was homeless as a monk, which isn't a big problem because we're homeless anyway, but literally he was without a temple, without a place to stay. So he made a vow, a wish to Bodhisattva, Kuan Yin, and then people came together and they bought a property, and very quickly he was able to establish his own monastery where he lives today. So sometimes people get strength recollecting the qualities of the Bodhisattva. They get a sincerity, a purity, and in this case, this monk wanted to be pure in his precepts and practice of Buddhism, and he didn't want to harbour or encourage superstition and certainly wrong practices like animal sacrifice. And so he was convinced this good karma led to his being able to re-establish a new monastery and had a place to live after all. And there's many stories like that you can read about. Some of them are legends, some of them are maybe quite true. Inspiring stories about people who have recollected the Bodhisattva, got strength of mind to get through an obstacle, a problem, like another one, a lady used to come here. She was the wife of the last Prime Minister of South Vietnam before the communists took over. And she was imprisoned and many of her family and relatives were executed, but she wasn't. She was kept in prison for a long time. And I asked her, how did she survive in prison? Eventually she managed to escape to Australia, but I asked her, how did she manage to survive in prison when the guards were communists and they were very cruel to her, and bullied her. And she said, well, she just thought of Kuan Yin every day. And that brought up the compassion, the forgiveness, and the patience to deal with that situation. She just prayed or meditated, recollecting Kuan Yin every day. And she said that was enough to keep her going, even when her own family were tortured, executed. She lost her husband, she lost other members of the family. So until she died, she used to come and offer dana here. And she said basically the recollection of Kuan Yin Bodhisattva kept her going. And there's, as a monk, you hear so many stories of people who have used the recollection of the Bodhisattva to get them through their illnesses, their obstacles in their life, that whether there is such a thing as a Bodhisattva or not, in the end, you can see it's obviously a recollection that is very skillful and brings out the right qualities in people. So that's the end of today's Q&A question. So if there's anything that's been useful, I hope it can assist you in your practice, and may you be blessed by the Buddha Dhamma Sangha.